Now it's time to talk about the animal kingdom. I'm going to break this into two parts, the invertebrates and the vertebrates. But to introduce the animal kingdom and introduce both of those groups, I need to talk about the general taxonomy of animals. To be in this group, to be an animal, you have to be multicellular. You have to be heterotrophic, which means you have to get your food from other organisms. Remember, plants are autotrophic, they make their own food. But we're different than the fungi. Fungi are both multicellular and heterotrophic also, like a mushroom is. But mushrooms don't ingest their food. They don't actually eat. Like you can't be walking down a trail and a mushroom can't bite you on the ankle. Thank God. Uh, Animals are the things that do that. So the fungi are in a separate group from the animals because of that feature. Um, animals are also known as metazoans because of these features. Um, the animals are believed to have evolved from a group of protozoans that were called the choanoflagellates. The choanoflagellates we think gave rise to the sponges at the beginning of what we know now are what we call the Cambrian explosion of evolution, which is over 550 million years ago. Uh, After the sponges came the cnidarians, which was the jellyfish, sea anemones, corals, hydras. And at that point, then, the cnidarians led to flatworms. And the flatworms were the first animal to actually seek and hunt and find their food. Sponges sit still, jellyfish accidentally bump into things, but flatworms actually hunt for both food and mates. So if you look here, the ancestral animals are here, and you'll see the first branch, primitive, still today, the poriferans, the sponges. These are the cnidarians. We'll skip the ctenophorans. The ctenophorans are the comb jellies. We'll skip those. In fact, I'm going to skip down to the simpler taxonomy that's or cladogram that's just down below, right there. So the choanoflagellate ancestor evolved, one group evolved into the sponges, another lineage led to the cnidarians. From the cnidarians, we get the flatworms, and the flatworms are a pivotal point in evolution because they were the first animal that could seek and find mates. They were the first animal to have bilateral symmetry, which is a right and a left. Sponges don't even have a right and a left or an up or a down. They're just a blob of cells most of the time. Cnidarians actually have radial symmetry. They're arranged around a circular pattern. The flatworms were the first to have a left side and a right side, which is better if you're going to try to move fast in a concerted way on this planet. After the flatworms, a huge branch occurred in the animal kingdom. One way went to the protostomes. Arthropods, annelids, and mollusks are all what we call protostomes. They have determinate development, meaning they develop a little differently than we do. We're on this side of the tree. We're with the echinoderms and the chordates. Mollusks are things like clams, octopus, and squid, and snails. Annelids are things like earthworms. Arthropods are bugs, but also millipedes, centipedes, insects of all types, spiders, crayfish, crabs, shrimp are all in this group. This is a huge group. By far, this group outnumbers this group. The chordates and the echinoderms are outnumbered by the mollusks, annelids, and arthropods. But we're both major players on this planet. So what I'm going to talk about now for the rest of this discussion is just the invertebrates. So we'll talk about sponges, cnidarians, flatworms, mollusks, annelids, arthropods, and echinoderms. And then in the last discussion, I'll talk about the chordates, which led to the vertebrates and us. So I don't believe I missed anything up here. Yeah, I think we're on our way. So let's talk about the sponges first. Sponges usually have no symmetry. They don't have a left and a right, and they don't have an all around. They just grow as tubes. A lot of them are just solid, porous bodies. And basically, they suck water in big holes and they shoot it out, or small holes. They suck water in small holes and shoot it out big holes. And they basically filter the water of microbes. They eat the microbes that are suspended in the water. The choanocytes within the sponge basically set up a current. They have a flagella that whips the water through the body of the sponge. Sponges were the first animal to invent what we call cell-to-cell communication, where one cell can talk to another cell and coordinate some kind of a body function. Um, the one thing that sponges have in common is they have spicules to provide internal support, and they invented the universal animal protein collagen, which is the animal glue that holds animals together. You've certainly heard of human collagen before, and other collagen in other animals. Collagen is a major component of things like cartilage and bone. Um, or at least collagen protein reinforces bone, especially when we're tiny. So sponges at one time were the only animal on Earth, and they ruled the world. And they were, sponges don't get up and walk around. They don't have all the features that most animals have, which are seek and find both prey and mates, and have sensory equipment and be alert and notice what's going on in the world. They just simply filter the ocean water for food. But at one time, that was the only animal on Earth. But a line branched away from the sponges and led to the cnidarians. The cnidarians include the sea anemones, hydras, corals, and jellyfish. Now, this group does have a step forward. They have radial symmetry, so there's a body plan now. They're not just growing as a blob of cells. They have symmetry, a design. And so now the DNA that controls them is more complicated, because to make design requires lots of instructions. So they have their body parts arranged in a circular pattern. This group is all considered predators, but they're not hunters. So they're predators. They eat other animals, but they don't hunt. They don't seek and find prey. Basically, they drift in the ocean, and other organisms basically bump into their tentacles, and they get paralyzed, and then they get consumed. Their body consists of basically a stomach, which is called the gastrovascular cavity, and then to that there are tentacles attached. And basically they have no anus, they have only a mouth. So the nematocysts, the stinging cells, sting and paralyze the prey. They pull the prey into their stomachs and they digest those life forms. This is a sea anemone. These are large. That right there is probably a dinner plate in size, but they can be bigger or smaller than that. This is a hydra. That's very small. That's not even as tall as a dime is wide. They're very small. Corals, these are absolutely tiny. You can fit, like, that little coral animal right there is not much bigger than a dot at the end of a sentence in a textbook. And then this jellyfish right here, it's a swimmer, but it doesn't seek and find. It just randomly swims. The bell just contracts and the jellyfish is propelled through the water. And these can get very large. So these are tiny little buttons. These are pretty small. These are fairly large, and these are fairly large. The most venomous creature on Earth, or the most venomous animal on Earth, is the box jellyfish, which is in this group. So next group, the flatworms. Now this was a pivotal moment in evolution when flatworms were invented, because they're the first hunters. This group includes the planarias, the tapeworms, and the flukes. They have bilateral symmetry. This is the most primitive animal to have bilateral symmetry with a left and a right. They have a head. Some of them have a head, not all of them. Some of them have eye spots. They're able to sense light and dark, which the jellyfish can, but probably sponges have a hard time with. They have a central nervous system. That is, they have a very primitive brain and some nerves, which sponges completely lack, and jellyfish only have primitive nerve nets. They have a large gut, but they have no anus. They did not invent an anus yet. So jellyfish and flatworms have to vomit the food that they can't digest. So they too, like the jellyfish, have a gastrovascular cavity. Most of the members of the group that have a mouth have the mouth in the middle of their body. So they have the bilateral symmetry, and they have a special set of Hox genes which control their embryonic development. We have Hox genes too. Ours are far more complicated than those that are in the flatworms, but our body is more complicated. Hox genes are what design the body during embryogenesis. So the more complicated the animal, the more complicated the Hox genes. And like I said, this is the first group to seek and find prey and food. Some of the members of this group have very complicated life cycles. Tapeworms have to infect. Tapeworms, if they infect a human, are passed in the form of eggs from the human's body, which hopefully fall on grass. Grass will get consumed, hopefully, as animals like pigs are foraging. The worm larvae inside the pig body will lodge in muscles, and when humans then catch the pig and butcher the pig and eat the pig, then we get infected again by the tapeworms. So this is a planaria, which is not a parasitic worm. You can see its little eye spots there. It's got a little brain up here up front. This is its gastrovascular cavity, and it's got a mouth right about there on the bottom of the body. This is the head of a tapeworm, which is a fairly disgusting little creature whose life cycle is described over here in this diagram. And this is a fluke, which is even more insidious. Flukes have very complicated life cycles also. Tapeworms and flukes are all entirely flatworm parasites that live in mostly vertebrates, but they can live in birds, and they can live in reptiles, and they can live in amphibian bodies. Pretty disgusting. Flukes often live in livers or in the circulatory system. Tapeworms usually live in muscle or the digestive tract. Ew. The next group, the annelids. These are segmented worms. Now, most of these worms are not parasites. Unlike this group, most species of flatworms actually are parasites. These are the free-living flatworms that are not parasites, but by far the planarias are outnumbered by tapeworms and flukes. The next group includes earthworms, tubeworms, polychaetes, and leeches. Now, leeches are parasitic, but they are outnumbered by the earthworms, tubeworms, and polychaetes. So most annelids are not parasites. And they live their lives tunneling through sand or dirt, either in the ocean floor or in soil in your backyard, and they eat dead stuff mostly. Even though you might think worms are cylinders and they're round, they actually have bilateral symmetry. In fact, this is the first group to have blood in internal tubes, internal circulatory tubes. So this group is a significant group on Earth, and they're major players in the food chain. I mean, early bird gets the worm. Lots of things eat worms. They were the first tunneling animals on Earth, and they probably were important to keeping the planet warm by releasing carbon dioxide from all of their decomposition, or all of the decomposition they encouraged by eating gunk in mud. This is the internal anatomy of an earthworm. You've got the brown parts, the digestive tract. You got the red tubes, which are the circulatory system, and in blue you have reproductive system. And so green is the nervous system. You can see a primitive nerve net going down the line here. Now, here's some examples. This is an earthworm, and that's a bristleworm. This is a feather duster worm that lives in the ocean. All three of these are free-living life forms. They're not parasites. These two make good fish bait. This one here is a parasite. Leeches are disgusting parasites, but there are not that many species of leeches compared to the other three groups. Which brings us now to the arthropods, the conquerors. Arthropods rule the world in terms of animal biomass. Now, again, I want to emphasize the prokaryotes really do outnumber and outweigh everything else. But as far as animals are concerned, if you add up all the other animals that are not arthropods and weigh them up and compare them to the arthropods, they don't even get close. The arthropods have the largest biomass of all animals on Earth. They inhabit all systems: oceans, lakes, deserts, forests, grasslands, from pole to pole. This group includes millipedes, centipedes, crustaceans, arachnids, and insects. They all have a right and a left bilateral symmetry. They are the most successful organisms on Earth. They invented the jointed leg, controlled by tendons attaching muscles to their exoskeleton. So they're very adept at moving. Flying. They invented flight. These are the first animals in the air. They have good sensory equipment. They have sensors with antennae and eyes. They have the insects have a crazy tracheal respiratory system. They do not have a lung like we do. Instead, they have tubes that circulate air throughout their entire body. So their whole body breathes, not just their whole body is essentially a lung. And they have wings. Many species of insects have wings for flight. So segments and legs vary radically from species to species. Lobsters, have claws on the ends of their legs, whereas grasshoppers just have little clingy toes at the ends of their legs. Arthropods are believed to be the first animals on land. The invention of the wing allowed them to find both food and mates in the air. There are 4 classes of arthropods on this planet. I could spend a whole year on this. There are classes in college called entomology, which is just the study of insects. That's all it is. But here we're just going to it's a survey. So we're talking about just making sure you're aware that the arthropods include the centipedes and the millipedes, which are different. Centipedes are flat, generally sting, and live underneath rotting logs and rocks and boulders in the woods, and they're predators and they eat other things. Millipedes are slow moving cylindrical. They're not flat. Cylindrical arthropods that feed on leaves, and they usually crawl around on the branches of trees. Crustaceans live in water like the ocean or lakes or streams. This includes shrimp, lobster, crayfish, and even the famous roly-poly is in that group. Arachnids include spiders, ticks, scorpions, and mites. Very fun group. And lastly, the insects includes such an array, I can't list them all, but butterflies, moths, bees, ants, wasps, bugs, beetles, mantids, grasshoppers, crickets are all in that group. This is the first group to have this crazy metamorphosis where eggs get laid by an adult like on a leaf. The eggs hatch into an animal that can feed on leaves. The animal gets big and then it becomes dormant, changes into a flying insect so it can find mates. Then it lays eggs on more leaves and starts the life cycle over again. That's called complete metamorphosis. This is incomplete metamorphosis where the adult lays eggs in the soil. The eggs actually hatch into a nymph, which looks a lot like the adult, but it doesn't have wings and reproductive organs. Then in a series of molts, the nymphs actually become adults. The difference, this is called incomplete metamorphosis. The difference is here, the larvae is radically different than the adult, whereas here the nymph is very similar to the adult. And examples of arthropods include shrimp, the daphnia, crayfish, the scary brown recluse spider, which is kind of dangerous to people, centipedes, millipedes, here's a tick, a scorpion, a daddy longlegs, which is actually not a true spider, they're called harvestmen, butterflies, grasshoppers, cicadas, and there's so many more things, we can't even list them all. The next group, the mollusks, are not as diverse as the arthropods. This is the second largest group of animals on Earth. This includes the abalone, snails, bivalves, slugs, the nautilus, squid, and octopus. They inhabit almost all environments. They're not as dominant as the arthropods. They're second most dominant. All mollusks have bilateral symmetry. They have a coelom, which I forgot to mention with the previous two groups. The coelom is present in the segmented worms like earthworms, and it's also present in arthropods. A coelom is a sac that encloses the internal organs. This group also has a respiratory system, which is often gills, and they have an open circulatory system which passes blood, through their body. Little different so both the mollusks and the arthropods have open circulation where blood oozes over organs rather than passing through tubes through organs. Oddly, this group includes animals with a single foot that they glide on. They don't have the jointed legs that arthropods do. And they have a specialized mouth called a radula, which scrapes food off of rocks. The mollusk body plan is very adaptable, and they were very successful in the animal arms race. And so what we have are clams, which live on the ocean floor and filter food from the water, kind of like a sponge. Chitons, which scrape algae off of rocks like snails. The squid, which is a really fast swimmer in the ocean. The octopus, which actually wins with intelligence and camouflage, that's the smartest of all the invertebrates. Slugs, which are snails without a shell. And then the snail also, these two have algae scraping mouths, and they scrape algae off of rocks. The octopus and the squid have a beak for crushing. Their radula is in the form of a beak. It looks like a parrot's beak, and they can crush their prey. The oyster is a filter feeder, like the like the clam. It filters water for food. And lastly, the nautilus, one of the very early swimming mollusks, is sort of like a squid with a shell for protection. So those are examples of different mollusks. Mollusks are a very successful group on Earth. Soft-bodied creatures, most of them are aquatic, but not all. Some snails live on land, but they're not as successful as the arthropods with the jointed legs and the exoskeleton. And that brings us to, lastly, the last group of invertebrates we're going to talk about are the echinoderms. Some people refer to these as the ultimate animal. Gee, it doesn't look like echinoderms do much. This includes the feather stars, the brittle stars, the sea stars, the sea urchins, and the sea cucumbers. They're so primitive, they lack bilateral symmetry as an adult, but the larvae have bilateral symmetry. The larvae actually have a head, the adults don't. So something that's so intrinsic to an animal, this group, which is related to the vertebrates, lacks certain key features that advanced animals have. The adults have an endoskeleton with bony plates. They can lock their muscles in position for hours and pull indefinitely. Their muscles are among the strongest muscles in the animal kingdom. If they lock onto a snail or a clam, they will pull the shell open. The clam has traditional muscles, whereas they don't. They can actually just pull without using energy, which is absolutely amazing. They don't die on schedule. They're sort of like trees in that they just grow and grow and grow until something accidentally kills them, like a storm or a predator. Most all of them have tube feet that are hydraulic little suckers that grab things and pull them along. And they have a very primitive stomach for digesting things. They are a very successful group, and they do not have brains, brawn, or speed. And they can regenerate missing parts like no other animal in the animal kingdom. This group includes sea stars, the wriggly brittle stars, the sea cucumber, which is just an amorphous tubular animal, the sand dollar, which is famous on beaches on the Florida coast, and the feather star, which is actually an upside-down starfish that just sticks its arms up in the air and catches things in the water. Echinoderms, this group, they are invertebrates, but they are the closest invertebrate relative to the vertebrates. That concludes the invertebrate discussion. The next time you hear from me, I'll be talking about the vertebrates.